Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The sound of a diamond ring cracking against marble is distinct. It sounds like a gunshot in a silent room, sharp, final, and violent. Julian Vane did not weep. He did not scream. He simply watched the platinum band, an heirloom of the Thorne family for 3 generations, spin wildly across the foyer of the Grand Duke's estate before coming to a rest at the polished black boots of the most dangerous man in the empire. Outside, the storm was tearing the sky apart, thunder rattling the heavy oak doors, but the air inside was suffocatingly still. Julian, drenched to the bone, his white dress shirt clinging to his shivering frame like a second skin, looked up. He wasn't looking at his fiancée. He was looking at the man his fiancée feared most. "I don't want your pity, Lord Draven," Julian said, his voice trembling not from cold, but from a rage so white-hot it threatened to incinerate his reason. "I want your name." Cashin Draven, the mad dog of the north, the man whose mere whisper caused senators to sweat, leaned against the doorframe. He held a glass of amber whiskey, his eyes, dark as a moonless ocean, narrowing as he assessed the soaking wet, beautiful aristocrat on his doorstep. "You are engaged to Silas Thorne," Cashin said, his voice a low rumble that vibrated in Julian's chest. "The wedding is in 3 days. The entire capital is already celebrating." "Silas is dead to me," Julian replied, the water dripping from his silver blonde hair onto the pristine floor. "I found him an hour ago, in our bed, with my stepbrother." Cashin didn't blink. He took a slow sip of his drink. "And you came to me, Silas's sworn enemy? That is a desperate move, little bird. Or perhaps a foolish one." "It is a calculated one," Julian stepped forward. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by the steel that had kept the Vane family at the top of the merchant guilds for a century. "Silas needs my dowry to cover his gambling debts. Without it, the Thorne estate collapses. If I cancel the wedding, he spins the narrative that I am mentally unstable. He has the press in his pocket. But if I marry you, if I merge the Vane fortune with the Draven military might, Silas doesn't just lose. He disintegrates." Cashin pushed off the doorframe, walking slowly toward Julian. He towered over him, a predator inspecting a very interesting, very foolish rabbit. He reached out, his calloused fingers tilting Julian's chin up. "You are offering yourself as a weapon of war, Julian," Cashin whispered, his breath smelling of smoke and expensive liquor. "Do you know what happens to weapons when the war is over?" "I don't care," Julian hissed, his blue eyes meeting the darkness of Cashin's without flinching. "Make him hurt. Make him regret the day he thought I was weak enough to be trampled on. Marry me, Cashin, and I will give you the Vane trade routes to the south." A cruel, terrifying smile spread across Cashin Draven's face. It was the smile of a wolf that had just been handed the keys to the sheep pen. Done. The morning sun filtered through the heavy velvet curtains of the Draven estate, but it brought no warmth to Julian. He sat on the edge of the massive 4-poster bed, staring at the intricate patterns on the rug. The events of the previous night felt like a fever dream. He was married. It had been a quick, brutal affair. A midnight summon to a terrifyingly compliant magistrate, papers signed in ink that looked too much like blood in the dim light, and a ring, heavy, black obsidian set in gold, shoved onto his finger. The door to the bedroom opened, and Cashin walked in. He was shirtless, a towel draped over his shoulders, water glistening on his scarred torso. Julian instinctively stiffened. The rumors about Cashin were numerous and grotesque, that he had killed his own father, that he had no heart, that he broke lovers like toys. "Stop shaking," Cashin said, walking to the wardrobe. He didn't look at Julian. "I have no interest in forcing myself on you. This is a business transaction. You are the Vane heir. You have dignity. Try to maintain it." Julian bristled, his pride stinging. "I am not shaking from fear. I am shaking from anger. I should be at a dress rehearsal right now. Instead, I am plotting the destruction of my childhood sweetheart." "Sweetheart," Cashin scoffed, pulling a crisp white shirt over his broad shoulders. "Silas Thorne never loved you, Julian. He loved your money. He's been sleeping with your stepbrother for 2 years. Everyone knew. Except you." The words were a physical blow. Julian stood up, his hands clenched into fists. "Everyone. The nobility talks. You were the pretty bird in the gilded cage, too busy reading poetry to notice the bars were rusting. Cashin turned, buttoning his cuffs. His gaze was critical, unyielding. If we are to do this, you need to wake up. You are now the spouse of the most hated man in the empire. Silas will come for you. He will try to invalidate the marriage. He will claim I coerced you. Let him try, Julian said, his voice dropping an octave. Good. Cashin walked over, stopping inches from Julian. The size difference was overwhelming. Cashin radiated a heat, a power that made the air feel thin. Tonight is the Emperor's masquerade. Silas will be there. He expects you to be groveling at his feet, begging for forgiveness for running away. Instead, we are going to make an entrance. Cashin reached out, his fingers brushing against Julian's cheek. It wasn't a caress, it was a claim. We're black. It suits your soul right now. The Imperial Ballroom was a sea of pastel silks, sparkling jewels, and hushed whispers. The orchestra played a waltz, but the tension in the room was palpable. Silas Thorne stood near the champagne fountain, laughing with a group of sycophants. He looked dashing in white and gold, the picture of a grieving fiancé whose partner had thrown a tantrum and vanished. He'll be back, Silas was saying loudly, swirling his glass. Julian is emotional. He gets confused. I've sent a carriage to pick him up. We'll have this sorted by midnight. Is that so? The voice cut through the music like a blade. The orchestra faltered and stopped. The crowd parted like the Red Sea. At the top of the grand staircase stood Cashin Draven. He was a vision of nightmare elegance, clad in a military-style suit of midnight blue and black, medals gleaming on his chest. But no one was looking at Cashin. They were looking at the man on his arm. Julian Vane wore a suit of crushed black velvet, tailored to accentuate his slender waist and long legs. A diamond choker, far more expensive than the engagement ring he had discarded, glittered at his throat. His silver hair was swept back, revealing a face that was cold, regal, and breathtakingly beautiful. Silas dropped his glass. It shattered, the sound echoing in the silent hall. Julian. Silas choked out, his face draining of color. Cashin led Julian down the stairs, their steps perfectly synchronized. Every eye was on them. The mad dog and the fallen angel. It was a tableau of dark romance that no one could look away from. They stopped directly in front of Silas. You? Silas stammered, looking from Julian to Cashin. Get away from him, Draven. Julian, come here. You've made your point. Stop this madness. Silas reached out to grab Julian's wrist. Before his fingers could graze the velvet, Cashin's hand shot out, catching Silas's wrist in a grip that looked bone-crushing. Touch my husband again, Cashin said, his voice low and pleasant, and I will remove the hand. A collective gasp ripped through the room. Husband, Silas whispered, horror dawning in his eyes. Julian stepped forward, gently placing his hand over Cashin's gripping fist. He didn't pull Cashin back. He simply looked at Silas with a pitying smile. We eloped last night, Silas, Julian said, his voice carrying clearly to the stunned onlookers. I realized that I needed a man who could handle me, not a boy who plays with scraps behind my back. Silas flushed a violent red. You whore. You can't do this. The contract, the dowry, is void, Cashin interjected, releasing Silas's hand with a shove that sent the other man stumbling back. The Vane assets have already been transferred to the Draven vault. You are bankrupt, Thorne. Silas looked around wildly. The court, sensing blood in the water, was already turning on him. The sneers, the whispers. He was finished. I'll kill you, Silas screamed, lunging forward. It was pathetic. Cashin didn't even move. The Imperial guards were there in a second, restraining the screaming man. As they dragged Silas away, kicking and cursing, Julian felt a strange hollowness in his chest. It was over. The revenge he had craved. He felt a large, warm hand settle on the small of his back. Breathe, Cashin murmured in his ear. Don't let them see you falter. Chin up, my lord. Julian looked up at Cashin. For the first time, he saw something other than cold calculation in those dark eyes. He saw respect. The weeks that followed were a strange purgatory. Living with Cashin was not the nightmare Julian had expected. It was quiet. Cashin worked incessantly, managing his armies and his vast territories. Julian, refusing to be idle, took over the household accounts. He found the Draven finances in shambles, not from a lack of money, but from neglect. Cashin didn't care about gold. He only cared about steel. Julian organized, invested, and streamlined. He turned the gloomy, fortress-like estate into a functioning palace. One evening, 3 months into their marriage, Julian was in the library, working by the light of an oil lamp. The rain was lashing against the windows, reminding him of the night he had arrived. The door creaked open. Cashin stood there. He looked exhausted. There was a bandage wrapped around his forearm, seeping red. Julian stood up immediately, his chair scraping against the floor. "You're hurt." "An assassination attempt," Cashin said casually, walking to the liquor cabinet. "Silas's loyalists. They are becoming desperate." "Sit down," Julian commanded. Cashin paused, looking at Julian with amusement. "I beg your pardon." "I said sit down. You're bleeding on my rug." Cashin chuckled, a dry, raspy sound, and sat in the leather armchair. Julian fetched the first aid kit. He knelt between Cashin's legs, rolling up the blood-soaked sleeve. The wound was deep, a knife slash. "Why didn't you go to a healer?" Julian asked, his hands steady as he cleaned the wound with alcohol. "I don't trust them," Cashin replied, watching Julian's face. "I trust no one." "You trust me," Julian said softly. It wasn't a question. Cashin fell silent. He watched the way Julian's long lashes cast shadows on his cheekbones. He watched the gentle, precise movements of his hands. "You are a paradox, Julian," Cashin said quietly. "You look like porcelain, but you act like iron. I thought you would leave once Silas was ruined. You have your own money now. You could annul this marriage." Julian finished bandaging the arm and looked up. "And go where?" "Back to a society that whispers behind my back. Besides," Julian hesitated, "I have grown used to the quiet here. And you are not as terrible as they say." "I am worse." Cashin leaned forward. The air between them shifted, becoming heavy, charged. "I am a monster, Julian. I have killed more men than you have met. I have no kindness in me." "You gave me a home when I was drowning," Julian countered, his voice barely a whisper. "That is not the action of a monster." Cashin's eyes searched Julian's. For a moment, the mask slipped. There was a hunger there, a deep, starving loneliness that mirrored Julian's own. "Julian," Cashin warned, his voice rough. "If you stay, if you truly stay, I will not let you go. This contract becomes real. There will be no exit." "I tore up the exit clause weeks ago," Julian admitted. Cashin froze. Then, slowly, he reached out, his hand cupping the back of Julian's neck. He pulled him closer. The kiss was not tentative. It was consuming, tasting of rain, whiskey, and desperation. It was a seal far more binding than the one on their marriage certificate. Peace, however, is rarely allowed to last in the capital. The invitation arrived on black paper. The Emperor's Hunt, a mandatory event for all high nobility. It was a thinly veiled power play, a chance for the factions to assert dominance in the wild forests of the north. "You shouldn't go," Cashin said, throwing the invitation onto the breakfast table. "It's a trap. If I don't go, they will say the vain heir is a coward," Julian replied, buttering his toast calmly. "And they will say you are keeping me prisoner." "We go." Cashin gritted his teeth. "Fine. But you stay by my side. You do not leave my sight." The hunting grounds were vast, a dense forest shrouded in mist. The air was cold, biting. Julian, dressed in riding leathers, rode a white mare beside Cashin's massive black stallion. The hunt began. The horns blared. Chaos erupted an hour later. A group of riders separated them. It was deliberate. A wall of horses, confusion, shouting about a bear sighting. In the mayhem, Julian's horse was spooked. It bolted. "Julian." Cashin's roar was lost in the wind. Julian struggled to control the mare, tearing through the underbrush. He finally managed to slow her down in a clearing miles away from the main party. He wasn't alone. Silas stepped out from behind a tree. He looked haggard, his clothes dirty, his eyes manic. He held a crossbow. "I knew you'd come here," Silas sneered. "I knew Draven couldn't watch you every second." "Silas," Julian said, keeping his voice steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "Put the bow down. You are already in exile. This is treason." "Treason?" Silas laughed, a high, broken sound. "I have nothing left. He took it all. My money, my home, my reputation. And you. You were supposed to be mine. You were my obedient little puppet. Silas raised the crossbow. If I can't have the vain fortune, no one can. The twang of the bowstring was sickening. Julian squeezed his eyes shut. Thud. There was no pain. Julian opened his eyes. Cassian stood in front of him. He had dismounted from his horse in a blur of motion, throwing himself between the bolt and Julian. The bolt was buried in Cassian's shoulder. Cassian! Julian screamed, sliding off his horse. Cassian didn't fall. He didn't even flinch. He looked down at the bolt, then up at Silas. His eyes were glowing with a demonic fury that made the air turn to ice. You missed the heart, Cassian snarled. Silas dropped the crossbow, terror seizing him. No. You're human. You should be down. Cassian ripped the bolt out of his shoulder with a wet tear of flesh. Blood sprayed onto the snow. He didn't make a sound. He began to walk toward Silas. I told you, Cassian said, his voice calm, terrifyingly void of emotion. Touch him, and I will remove the hand. Silas turned to run, but he was too slow. Cassian was upon him. It was not a fight. It was an execution. When the Imperial Guards finally broke through the trees, led by the Emperor himself, they found a gruesome scene. Silas Thorne was unconscious, broken, tied to a tree. And Cassian Draven was on his knees in the snow, clutching Julian Vane to his chest. The mad dog was shaking. I'm fine. Cassian, I'm fine. Julian was weeping, his hands pressing against Cassian's bleeding shoulder. Look at me. I'm safe. Cassian buried his face in Julian's neck, breathing in his scent, grounding himself. I thought I was too late, he rasped, his voice breaking. I thought I lost you. The Emperor watched from his horse, signaling the guards to stand down. He saw the way the terrifying Duke clung to his husband. He saw the way the elegant Vane heir protected the monster with his own body. It seems, the Emperor murmured to his advisor, that the wolf has been tamed. The recovery was slow. Cassian's wound was poisoned, leading to days of high fever. Julian did not leave his bedside. He slept in a chair, he fed Cassian broth, he wiped the sweat from his brow. On the fourth night, the fever broke. Cassian opened his eyes to see Julian reading by candlelight. You're still here, Cassian croaked. Julian closed his book. He walked over to the bed and sat on the edge. Where else would I be? You could be free, Cassian whispered. Silas is in the dungeon. He will be executed for attempted murder of a high lord. You have your revenge. You don't need me anymore. Julian sighed. He took Cassian's hand, lacing their fingers together. You really are an idiot for a genius strategist, Julian said softly. Do you think I stayed for revenge? Revenge is cold, Cassian. I hate the cold. Julian leaned down, resting his forehead against Cassian's. I stayed because when the world turned its back on me, you were the only one who opened a door. I stayed because you took a bolt for me. I stayed because, somehow, in this mess of contracts and blood, I fell in love with you. Cassian's eyes widened. He searched Julian's face for any sign of deception. He found none. I am a difficult man to love, Julian, Cassian warned. I am possessive. I am jealous. I have enemies everywhere. I know. Julian smiled, brushing a strand of dark hair from Cassian's forehead. Good thing I'm rich enough to hire good security, and smart enough to destroy your enemies before they get to the gate. Cassian let out a laugh, a genuine, warm sound that filled the room. He pulled Julian down, tucking him into his side. Then it settled, Cassian murmured, closing his eyes, holding his world in his arms. We are partners. Until the end. Until the end, Julian agreed. Outside, the storm had passed. The moon shone bright and clear over the Draven estate. The mad dog had found his heart, and the fallen angel had found his wings. And woe to anyone who tried to separate them ever again. And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Silas get exactly what he deserved, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a husband who tried to kill you? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then,